Okay, so picture this. A tiny recording studio in a small town in Indiana that somehow managed to record the entire soundtrack of the jazz age and change American music forever. But what if that same exact place was also hiding a really dark, shocking secret? Well, that's the story we're digging into today.
On one hand, Gennett Records is called the Cradle of Recorded Jazz. It's where absolute legends like Louis Armstrong and Jelly Roll Morton made their very first records. But then on the other hand, the very same company was pressing and selling records for the Ku Klux Klan. It's this absolutely wild paradox that's at the heart of the Gennett Records story.
So that's the big question, isn't it? How on earth does that happen? How could a place responsible for so much cultural beauty also be pumping out so much hate? To figure that out, we've got to rewind. We have to go back to the very beginning.
You know, the funny thing is, the Gennett story doesn't even start with a passion for music. Nope. It starts with a really smart, maybe even a little ruthless business decision made by a huge manufacturing company.
See, Gennett was never its own thing, really. It was just this small part of the massive Starr Piano Company. And when I say massive, I am not kidding. By the early 1900s, Starr was this sprawling 23-acre factory complex in Richmond, Indiana, just churning out thousands and thousands of pianos.
Now, the people running Starr were sharp. They could see the writing on the wall. The piano had been the center of home entertainment for decades. But now this new thing, the phonograph, was taking over. So what they do? They pivoted. They already knew woodworking, so they started making the cabinets for phonographs. Then they just started building the whole machine. And what's the last logical step? Well, every phonograph needs records. Gennett was created simply to be the software for their new hardware.
So how does this little side project of a record label become this revolutionary force in music? Well, it all started when they decided to pick a fight with the biggest giant in the entire industry. We're talking a real David and Goliath situation here.
Back then, the recording industry was basically a monopoly. A few huge companies controlled everything, and the biggest, baddest one of them all was the Victor Talking Machine Company. Yeah, that's the one with the famous logo of the dog listening to the gramophone. They used patents to keep a death grip on the industry, especially one patent for how you cut grooves into a record.
And this is where Gennett does something incredibly gutsy. In 1919, they just start making records using the patented method anyway. They basically dared Victor to sue them. And of course, Victor did. But here's the crazy part. Gennett won. And then they won again on appeal. The courts decided that Victor couldn't claim a monopoly on a technology that it didn't even invent.
And look, this wasn't just a win for Gennett. This was a game changer for the entire music world. That court decision basically took a sledgehammer to the monopoly. It put the standard 78 RPM record into the public domain, and that opened the floodgates for hundreds of small, independent labels to pop up and start recording all the amazing, authentic music that the big guys wouldn't touch.
All right, so now they're free to record whoever they want. You're probably picturing some fancy, state-of-the-art studio, right? Well, you would be wrong, not even close.
Yeah, this quote pretty much says it all. The legendary Gennett recording studio wasn't some pristine, soundproofed lab in New York City. It was, for all intents and purposes, a shed. A little wooden shack that was just an afterthought, tacked on to the back of the giant piano factory.
And the conditions inside? Oh man, they were, let's just say, rustic. The studio was literally right next to active railroad tracks. Can you imagine you're in the middle of a perfect take, and then a train comes rumbling by? They had to stop all the time. And their high-tech soundproofing? Straw stuffed in the walls and an old rug on the floor. It is truly unbelievable that some of the greatest recordings in American history came out of this room.
And yet, the legends came. In 1923, the great King Oliver's Creole Jazz Band traveled down from Chicago. And playing in that band was a quiet, 22-year-old cornet player named Louis Armstrong. The songs they laid down in that rickety shack were his very first recordings. We're talking about the birth of recorded jazz right there.
But Gennett wasn't just making music history, they were making American history. Just a month before Armstrong even showed up, the piano genius Jelly Roll Morton recorded in that same room, with a white band, the New Orleans Rhythm Kings. You have to remember, this is 1923 America. That just didn't happen. It's now recognized as the first racially integrated jazz session ever recorded. Just wow.
And the legends just kept coming. A year later, a brilliant young cornetist from Iowa named Bix Beiderbecke brought his band to Richmond, and his lyrical, totally unique style, first captured on Gennett wax, would go on to influence generations of musicians. It was like that little shack by the tracks was some kind of magnet for musical genius.
Which brings us right back to where we started. Back to that really uncomfortable, troubling question. How do you square this incredible, barrier-breaking artistic legacy with the much, much darker side of Gennett's business?
And nothing captures this paradox better than looking at a single day, October 5th, 1923. In the morning, you've got Louis Armstrong in that studio, literally inventing the future of American music. That very same afternoon, just down the road, 30,000 members of the Ku Klux Klan are holding a massive rally. It's two different Americas, existing side by side in one small town on the very same day.
So what was the deal? The answer wasn't about ideology. It was about money, plain and simple. Gennett had a side hustle doing what are called vanity pressings. Basically, if you had the cash up front, they'd record and press records for anybody, and the Klan was a paying customer. These records were treated like a separate, under-the-table deal. They had their own distinct red labels, they were never listed in the official Gennett catalogs, and they were shipped straight to Klan headquarters. For Gennett, it was purely business. Now, Gennett's golden era was brilliant, but it was also brief. It got hit with a 1-2 punch it just couldn't recover from. First, the Great Depression came, and people stopped buying luxury items like records. Then, radio took off, providing music for free. Gennett stopped recording in 1934, and its parent company, Starr Piano, shut its doors for good in 1952.
So in the end, what do we make of it all? Well, despite its deep, profound contradictions, Gennett's legacy is just monumental. By being outsiders, by being willing to record almost anyone for a buck, they accidentally became the most important archivists of American grassroots music. They captured the raw, real sounds of jazz, blues, and early country that the big, polished labels in New York completely ignored.
It really leaves you with a final thought, doesn't it? Gennett Records shows us that a simple object, like an old record, can contain the most beautiful and the most disturbing parts of our history all at once. It makes you wonder, what other complex, messy stories are hiding in plain sight, just waiting to be heard?